Emil Guillermo, Emil Amok to you. This really is our secret podcast. We do it live on youtube.com at my Emil Amok 1 channel. And then we do it also on Facebook, fb.com/emilguillermo.media. And it's there. You can't go to wherever you podcast. So it really is secret. We do it live. That's why we do it live. And today, a happy birthday to Ishmael Reed. It's Ishmael's birthday today. And that's why I think, if you want to say happy birthday to Ishmael, go to the PETA podcast. That you can pick up wherever podcasts are heard. The latest issue of the PETA podcast, I interview Ishmael Reed about his new play, The Shine Challenge 2024, which is actually an animal rights play, if you believe it or not. It is. It's written an animal rights play. So catch that wherever you get your podcasts, the PETA podcast. I interview Ishmael Reed. And it coincides with a stage reading of Reed's play, The Shine Challenge, which is about the sinking of the Titanic. Yeah, did you know that they were trying to pin that on a black man? Did you know? And he had a trial, and that animals were used to testify in the trial. You're going to have to see it. It's a satire. Oh, come on, Emil, you jest. No, it's real. Well, part of the black oral tradition that Ishmael Reed preserves or adds to and challenges others to embellish and do what they will, it's the Shine Challenge. I mean, this goes back to 1912, to the 30s, the 40s. Langston Hughes heard it during World War II. In Harlem, put it on paper. Then other people just went with it, and Ishmael Reed is going with it at 2024 and challenges others to do the same. Anyway, check out the play. It's at the Nuyorican website, and there you see ways to get tickets. Nuyorican.org. You can get your tickets, and you see it on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. But go to nuyorican.org. You get a link that's yours to watch the play as many times as you want between now and sometime in March. Ticket, small fee, but you should get it. Ishmael Reed's The Shine Challenge 2024. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Well, that's what we're starting off with today, but we want to talk about, let's see. Remember, I said I'm for free speech. I'm an absolutist for free speech. More speech, not less. So we want more speech, less Shane Gillis. He's hosting Saturday Night Live on Saturday. And sure enough, more columns, more articles, more commentaries are out. Most are questioning why Shane Gillis is even being asked back to host. One article in the New Yorker magazine, the New York Magazine's Vulture, right, section, says this is what Lorne Michaels likes. He likes this kind of, to create this kind of tension. This is his thing, and it's sort of working. I mean, they have a new promo out, which is Shane Gillis telling, nondescript jokes to the two cast members as he workshops and works out what he's going to say. People are going to want to see what he's going to say 5 years after all the racist commentary about Asian Americans. So this is getting to be a much bigger thing. There were stories. I'm going to read the story in the LA Times in a second. Like I said, more speech, not less. We're not censoring the guy, but people need to know why Shane Gillis is a strange phenomenon in this day and age, where as America gets more diverse, racist humor is getting more popular and getting a kind of lift. And maybe it's getting a lift because of one, Donald J. Trump, who can say things disparagingly about someone like Nikki Haley, I mean, commenting on her name, commenting on her South Asianness, racist, and then no blowback. In fact, hey, what is the message when you see someone like Donald Trump do what he does and get no blowback? You say to yourself, well, I can be racist and then run for president. Of course. So I'm going to read from it's behind a paywall. So I feel like Robin, well, I subscribe to the LA Times, so I'm like Robin Hood. And I will read from that in a second. But I want to talk about what I do when I'm not writing columns, when I'm not doing this. I'm going to different places and stages and talking and doing my one-man show, telling stories, doing stand-up. I did a stand-up thing at the Hollywood Improv over the weekend. I'm going to do bits of it, actually do all of it. A week from Saturday, a week from Sunday, and next week on Thursday and the following Saturday at the Rogue Festival. You say, well, what is the Rogue Festival, Emil? This is ideal for you. You're a rogue, right? The Rogue Festival is out of Fresno. If you haven't heard about it, it's the Fringe Festival of Fresno. Fresno deserves a Fringe Festival. It's not just in Edinburgh. It's not just in New York, San Francisco. They've got a Rogue Festival in Rochester, a Rogue Festival in St. Louis, Cincinnati. It's a thing, right? Minneapolis. But in Fresno, a Rogue Festival has meaning because top storytellers and performers from all over come in and they perform. So this year, I am happy to be part of the Rogue Festival, and they have a publication that they're part of, or that's, part of the whole Fresno scene there. And I'm talking about Kings River Life. And I submitted an article to Kings River Life, and here it is for you. kingsriverlife.com. I guess you can go to it. I'm gonna read it to you because and then I'll tell you how to get tickets to my my show. Emil Amok Guillermo, why I'm going amok at the Rogue Festival 2024. And this is the reason. How many times do you see a Filipino American, a direct descendant of the first Filipinos to come to the U.S. in the 1920s as colonized Americans? How many times do you see that kind of person stand up and tell you exactly what happened to his people? I mean, that's what you get when you see my show, Emil Amok, Lost NPR host, married to PETA, and other untold stories, untold tales for an American Filipino life. And that's me, Emil Amok. I am a Lost NPR host. I was there. I tell you about my story about being at NPR. I tell you about being married to PETA. I tell you stories you don't hear about American Filipino life. Now, because it's so tragic, it's conversely funny and absurd. It's 1 hour of narrative storytelling with some stand-up that is like John Leguizamo's Latin History for Dummies, only uniquely Filipino. Because John Leguizamo wouldn't be doing Filipino History for Dummies. But we have a shared common ground there, that Spanish-American War, and it's unfortunately history that few people, read that Americans, know or even care about. And that's even if you're Filipino. So as the title implies, I was an NPR host in 1989 in Washington, D.C., when I was senior host of All Things Considered. Oddly enough, I remember interviewing John Leguizamo when I was working in radio in Washington, D.C. around 1991, 1992. But by then, I was no longer senior host of All Things Considered. That's what I was in 1989. even though, I must have been a young pup in 1989. As the first Filipino to be the regular host of a national news show in the U.S., I made history. And of course, I told every Filipino story I could. And then I got lost. And the stories I left out or couldn't get to are in this show. I also tell the story of growing up in San Francisco in the 1970s and how I went into media. And I discovered how Filipino history explains what happened to my life. But wait, I grew up in the 70s and my father arrived in the 1920s. How did that happen, Emil? Well, you'll have to come see the show. I explain how Filipinos were treated when they first came to California in large numbers. My father was one of 30,000 Filipinos who had arrived by 1930. And they were here to work the fields and were discouraged from starting families. That was easy to do because there were a few Filipino women who were allowed to come to America. And that forced Filipinos to seek out white women, which did not sit well with white men. That's the story. I also tell personal stories about being vegan, a vegan Filipino. What? Vegan and Filipino? You don't eat pork? What's wrong with you? My marriage to an animal rights executive at PETA. Affirmative action I talk about, and I also talk about Harvard. I was in the same class as Steve Ballmer. He owns the LA Clippers. I have more black hair. Oh, there was another guy too. Gates. But I mean, he didn't graduate. Put it all together in an hour and you have Emil Amok, Lost NPR host, married to PETA, and other untold stories from an American Filipino life. It's history and tragedy mixed with a little humor. I will also explain the Amok part. I perform my Amok monologues at fringe festivals around the country, including New York, Orlando, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, San Diego, and San Francisco since 2017. I've studied solo performance and storytelling with Mike Daisey, Dave Ford, Charlie Barron, Mark Kenward, Seth Barish even. When I'm not performing, I write columns on race, politics, and media for the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I also host the PETA podcast. But mostly, I say in this article in Kings River Life, I love to perform my American Filipino show, which I describe as Spalding Gray meets Ferdinand Marcos. Please come see it. And then I pad it out with a few things that people say about the show. Opinions, people's opinions. Have an opinion of your own. Please come see the show. It's at the Lotus Room on Olive Street, and tell your friends. Saturday, March 2nd, 2 p.m. Not this Saturday, but the following. Saturday, March 2nd, 9:30. Oh, a double header. Oh, catch that. See me on Fumes. Oh, no, I think the Fumes will kick in Sunday, March 3rd at 2 p.m. when you're back for a Sunday matinee. You're going to have to go to church first, and then Thursday, March 7th, 5:30, Saturday, March 9th, 5 p.m. Hey, all good times for those of us who like the earlier. And as I understand, it's not just older people who like earlier times. It's those Gen Xers. Gen Xers like earlier times. So definitely check out the show. And let me also give you this. You can go to the website and get your tickets at Fresno Rogue Festival. And if you're still on with us, I hope you see it right there. Emil Amok, Lost NPR host, married to PETA, and other untold tales from an American Filipino life. There it is. If you're looking at the screen on our YouTube channel, you can see, go to, let's see, https Fresno roguefestival.org slash series slash Emil dash Amok. There, just look for Emil Amok, and you'll find tickets and the whole schedule. So there. So we did that. We plugged everything, and we have and after I do Fresno, I'll be going to New York for the New York City Fringe, and then going to Orlando for the Orlando Fringe. That is a good fringe. I love Orlando. In fact, those are the three fringes that I love to go to. Well, this is the first time I got into Fresno, but the New York City Fringe and the Orlando Fringe, they're the best. They're the best. Okay, so now, I want to talk about Shane Gillis because he's, if you're Asian American, you got to wonder about Shane Gillis, right? I mean, you got to wonder, why is Shane Gillis coming back? I mean, really. And I say it's always about more speech, not less. And there's Shane Gillis there. You can see him on my screen. The LA Times wrote an excellent piece that I think you ought to get to. It's behind a paywall, so I want to read it. It's by Seth Simons, and it was published yesterday online. It's probably going to be out there today or tomorrow in print, but it's important because, like I said, I don't believe in censorship. I'm not censoring Shane Gillis, but I'm saying if he's out there, he needs to know that it is a source of debate, that he can't just do what he does and not expect some people to speak out and say, hey, you know what you're doing? And no one's canceling him, but what we're doing is we are speaking out. So I spoke out in my column on the ALDEF blog, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, where I said, hey, look, Shane Gillis is Catholic. Most Filipinos are Catholic. Many Asian Americans are. There are 27 million Asian Americans. Shane Gillis's penance should be 27 Our Fathers and 27 million Our Fathers and 27 million Hail Marys. He's got some time on his knees yet. 5 years after he said those bigoted things, I don't think it's enough to. In fact, I think it should be up to us, not up to Saturday Night Live, to bring him back and try to rehabilitate him. Anyway, here's Seth Simons' piece in the New York or the LA Times. Said, headline: Shane Gillis, who was fired by SNL over bigoted remarks, is hosting What Changed? Which is a good question. Trump changed. America has changed. We're okay with racism now. What has changed? Here's the lead. The comedian Shane Gillis, who will host Saturday Night Live this week, has described himself as racist. That's the term he uses in a 2017 episode of his podcast, Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast, currently the most popular show on Patreon. Chatting with his host or co-host, Matt McCusker, he recalls a crude impression of a Chinese person that he performed at a Philadelphia comedy theater the previous night. I like to open with a bad racist joke, he says, makes everyone know I suck. Or make sure everyone knows I suck. The bit visibly offended a group of Asian women in the audience, Gillis recalls. He later mocked them from the stage, then offered a half-hearted apology after the show. Stewing over the incident, he tells McCusker he will stop making fun of Asians. Then he seems to suggest he already tempers himself in his stand-up, if not in his unscripted material. All you have to do is listen to any of one of our podcasts, and he he's pretty He cuts himself off, but his meaning is clear. More interesting is what comes next. I tone it down so much on stage compared to this. When SNL hired Gillis as a featured player, In 2019, the venerable comedy series quickly discovered what exactly he was toning down. Within hours of the casting announcement, journalists uncovered racist, homophobic, and transphobic comments Gillis made on his podcast the previous year, including a slur for Chinese people and lengthy gripes about the same. I published several of these clips, so I cannot take credit for finding them. A comedian sent them to me. I must say that I, too, Emil Guillermo, published some of those and on my columns that went out mostly on the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund site, aldef.org/blog. Days later, SNL fired him and condemned his remarks. The 31-year-old declined to apologize, instead issuing a statement praising himself for getting hired. In conversations with stand-up comedians like Artie Lang and Theo Vaughn on their podcast, he defended his jokes, saying he wouldn't change anything about them. So, now, some people have characterized what he said as an apology. This writer says it wasn't. It was half-hearted. He did praise himself, and I don't really know if he really took into account the feelings of the people he hurt. Back to Seth Simon's article. It is perhaps unsurprising that when TMZ recently published even more clips of Gillis making bigoted jokes in 2018, featuring the N-word and a slur for Jewish people, the news barely made a ripple. After all, everyone knows he used slurs on Matt and Shane's secret podcast. Who would be surprised that he also used them on A Fair One, his show on Compound Media, the comedy network founded by Anthony Cumia, who in 2014 was fired from SiriusXM after he posted a series of racist tweets, where Gavin McInnes originated the Proud Boys in 2016? No. I suppose it's not revelatory that Gillis used even worse language than was previously reported. Still, it is worth dwelling on his A Fair One era, which spanned from 2018 to 2019. Before considering his more recent material. Implicit in his return to SNL and his broader ascension to stardom is the idea that he rose past his self-described racism to become a true comedian with hit specials like Netflix's Beautiful Dogs and the respective peers like Louis C.K. and Dave Chappelle. There's no doubt he's a true comedian. What about the other part? Conveniently, I, Seth Simons, found full video episodes of A Fair One in the form of unlisted uploads on a YouTube fan playlist. They correspond with episodes still available behind the Compound Media paywall. The Times has reviewed the videos and verified the statements made by Gillis on the podcast. Let's start at the beginning. Now, this is really, I just went over the old stuff. This is some good reporting done by Seth Simons and the LA Times, and the LA Times verified it. So this is where Shane Gillis is. What has changed is the headline, right? And apparently you decide after I read this. In one A Fair One segment, Gillis uses the N-word, ostensibly quoting his father's nickname for a childhood prank, N-word knocking. In another, taking a cue from a racist caller, he describes comedian Ian Vidance, a frequent A Fair One guest, as a K-word face bitch. In a third, he performs a crude impression of someone with Down syndrome before telling his co-hosts and guests that their hooked noses make them look Jewish. Later, he expresses skepticism of the idea that some homophobes are in the closet. Quote, I hate black people. I'm not black. I hate Jews. Not an effing Jew bone in my body. In a fourth, he complains about the CNN Jews playing on the studio's television, asking that it be changed to Fox News. The CNN Jew S. So it rhymes with bit, I guess. In a fifth, he praises his co-host's black voices before performing his own racist caricature. Then he effuses over the founder of the Proud Boys, I've watched Gavin McInnes videos and been like, hell yeah, dude, he says. I've gotten drunk and watch effing Gavin McInnes like highlight reels of him debating people, which he effing crushes people. He crushes. This is Gillis before he was famous, performing for an audience he knew was small and ideologically aligned. These are not the sort of jokes he tells on stage. They are the jokes he tells among friends. As with much racist and anti-Semitic comedy, they should horrify us, not because they are hateful, but because they are full of joy. All right, stepping out of the article. Get this. Like I said, this is a year after he got dinged. He's still saying them. He says them to a small audience. And as the writer points out, they're not hateful. They're full of joy. During the 2019 controversy, Gillis defended himself as a comedian who pushes boundaries. Raul Perez, a sociologist who studies racist humor, suggested that comedians like Gillis do in fact push an important boundary, the one delineating what level of racism is acceptable in the public square. They're trying to signal to society, hey, we know we have this boundary where we can't use this word, but just go along with me for a little bit, says Perez. Let's imagine a scenario where we can, and see, you're all laughing. No harm, no foul. There's a kind of whitewashing of this when racists and their humor are rehabilitated. And as Perez says, the sociologist, they're trying to signal to society, hey, we know we have this boundary, but look, you're laughing, no harm, no foul. Perez goes on. Then the bar gets raised. Now it's not just one or two comedians that can use the racial or anti-Semitic slur if they're not part of the group. Now it allows for others to do the same. And then, of course, people in the audience are like, well, Gillis can do it. Why can't I? Well, that's exactly the point I was making earlier in the show about Donald Trump. When you see Donald Trump going after Nikki Haley and her being an Indian, when you see Donald Trump saying China virus or Kung Flu virus or going after it, it's the green light is on. And this guy, Donald Trump, becomes president. Well, he became president. He did it as president. And I want to be president again. So that's part of this negative evolution of how racism becomes normalized. Now, Gillis hosted a fair one years ago before he learned to channel the darker parts of his psyche into great comedy. Now he's at the top of the class, praised for his ability to play to liberals and conservatives alike. This is, as Seth Simons points out, is one of the things that Gillis has learned to do. He's evolved, right? He's morphed. He's dealt with the negatives that have come his way. So now he's able to play to liberals and conservatives. His stand-up flirts with racism, but deviously avoids taboo, toying with the audience's assumptions about him as a boorish white man. According to a 2022 New Yorker profile, he even makes a point of chiding fans who approach him to repeat the slurs he once used. Is he still toning things down as he said in 2017, or has he truly evolved? As it turns out, you need only listen to his podcasts, especially the paywalled episodes, to learn that Gillis never stopped making fun of people who aren't like him. He's generally steered clear of outright slurs since 2019, but he's continued using crude Asian accents and pejoratives like the Japanese and the Chinese. That's exactly what Donald Trump does. China, that's Donald Trump, right? Not only has he referred to Jewish people as the Jays and his agent as my Jew agent. He's employed stereotypical Jewish American accents and mocked retarded Jews. In 2022, he even participated in an earnest discussion about whether Jewish people control the media. An earnest discussion, meaning they were serious. It wasn't a joke. He has used the term trap to refer to trans people, routinely uses trans as both a noun and a verb. A trans, he transed, and repeatedly misgendered the Wachowski sisters in an episode last year. I didn't even know the F Matrix brothers trans. He has also speculated about parents forcing their kids to trans and pondered whether some trans people transition out of horniness, reinventing the pseudoscientific concept of autogynephilia. So this is pretty good reporting by Seth Simons, who's found these things behind paywalls and in other dark avenues of the web where it can't be found by the general public, but to other like racists, there it is. Back to Simons' article. It may be tempting to excuse these tendencies consistent in his work over a period of years as offhand riffs that don't reflect his values. But while Gillis has presented himself as politically in the middle, in his network special, he says he's not a Republican, though he feels the pull of grievance politics. His podcasts reveal this to be a pretense. He's pretending. In a 5-hour election live stream in 2020, Gillis and his friends fervently yearned for Donald Trump's victory. And he twice explained how much he wanted the left to lose. In 2017, he remarked to McCusker that the night of Trump's 2016 win was our Super Bowl. In 2022, he identified as conservative in a segment praising Ted Cruz when the senator was a guest on The View for doing battles with those effing yappy bitches. His quote. That same year, he told Joe Rogan about a trip he took to Mar-a-Lago at the invitation of a group of friends who worked there. And this past July, he met Trump at a UFC event and posted a picture with him on Instagram. That was pretty sick, he told McCusker of the experience. Throughout it all, he has released numerous podcasts with far-right comedians and Holocaust deniers. Crucially, Gillis at times acknowledges his racist language as racist, just like he did in 2017. You hear me laying down? The game's on. I'm just going to be a little racist and have a little bit of fun, he says, after making fun of Jewish people in a 2022 Patreon exclusive episode. If the blood rushes to my head, all my blood's racist. I do have racist blood. I mean, that's what he says. I mean, it's straight from the horse's mouth. I do have racist blood, Shane Gillis says. I mean, that's pretty, in the eyes of Shane Gillis, it's self-affirming, I guess. In a 2022 Patreon exclusive episode, if the blood rushes to my head, all my blood's racist. I do have racist blood. Just remember, blood, very important metaphor that Donald Trump uses, saying that immigrants poison America's blood. Well, the immigrants can fix the racism in the blood of people like Shane Gillis. That's how you get into marriages. A positive thing, I've always thought. But not when someone outright says, hey, if the blood rushes to my head, all my blood's racist. I do have racist blood. Back to Seth Simons' article. Do I think Gillis shouldn't host SNL because of all of this? This is Simons. It's a question that we all have when we first heard this a couple weeks ago. I mean, SNL, as I pointed out, kind of interesting to announce it several weeks ago so that it could gauge what kind of reaction it would get. And it hasn't really been that great. No blowback. I mean, Gillis has become a very popular comedian, and Asian Americans, as I've said in my Aldif blog, may just have too much other stuff that are more important than this. But culturally, it is important. This is what Simon says. Do I think Gillis shouldn't host SNL because of all this? Trick question. I don't think anyone should host SNL because I think SNL, which exerts a monopolistic chokehold on American comedy, should not exist. Well, that's a new one. I never heard of that, but in some ways, it is a monopolistic chokehold. And they've got 40 plus years. And I've had some friends who worked for SNL. And in fact, none of them, I mean, they'll say publicly they enjoyed the experience, but everyone has a story. It's not the nirvana that people might think. So here's Seth Simon saying, monopolistic chokehold on American comedy that should not exist. But it does exist, and despite its waning relevance, it still plays an important part in popular culture, both as a talent pipeline and as a public relations machine for the famous and the powerful. Of course, that's what talk shows are about. Plugs, plugola. Not in the illegal sense, but they're plugging away. PR. That makes it important for us to observe what's happening here. A level of offstage but on-mic bigotry that SNL producer Lorne Michaels deemed unacceptable in 2019 is fine and dandy in 2024. 5 years later. As of publication, a spokesperson for SNL did not comment after several requests to explain why the show chose to have Gillis host, despite having fired him for his remarks. That is true across the line. In all the reports I've seen, no statement. Nothing. Not that I've seen. And for this article, it seems like the LA Times did try to get to Lorne Michaels. No comment so far. Back to the article. If SNL's decision to book Gillis stirs controversy within Studio 8H, it would not be the first time Michaels hired misogynistic comedian Andrew Dice Clay to host in 1990, leading cast member Nora Dunn to boycott the episode. Lorne said, Andrew Dice Clay was a phenomenon worth examining. Dunn later recalled, though she resisted the notion that SNL examines its host, "You're there to make them look good," she said. Former SNL head writer Colin Jost echoed Dunn in his 2020 memoir, A Very Punchable Face. Said Jost, once a host arrives, even when you're ambivalent about, you do your best to make them look good, or at least minimize how bad they make you look, the Weekend Update anchor wrote. In 2022, a number of SNL writers reportedly boycotted an episode hosted by Chappelle, protesting his recent pivot to anti-trans activism. Cast members Bowen Yang, Sarah Sherman, and Molly Kearney notably did not appear in the taping. So far, there have been no rumblings from within the show about Gillis. I joked, Emil Guillermo here, that maybe Bowen Yang, because he's Asian, might say something. Maybe they'll mud wrestle Gillis and Bowen Yang for supremacy of the show. But there haven't been any rumblings. And that promo that SNL put out yesterday was so innocent, tamping down any kind of controversy or a sense of controversy. Back to Seth Simons' article. I know better than to seek moral consistency from a show that airs comedy sketches in between television commercials, which is an interesting way to talk about SNL because that's what it is. Is it a comedy sketch show or, as Simons puts it, a show that airs comedy sketches in between television commercials where sometimes they got to do better television commercials to be funny because that's what the show has, commercials. I think, as I pointed out in my column on the Aldif blog, that the reason why it was remarkable in 2019 is when Saturday Night Live pulled they pulled him. They pulled Gillis. That was a surprise, and it wasn't clear that, well, was it that Asian American voices were finally heard, that we were upset and they listened to us? Was it because there was this diversity push at the time 5 years ago that doesn't exist today, and now that DEI efforts are sort of falling, dying on the vine at the corporate level, at the college level? Maybe SNL said, no, now's the time to challenge. Now's the time to get this kind of buzz for SNL doing the right thing or doing the right wing thing. Back to Seth Simons' article. What I would like instead is an honest reckoning with the fact that Gillis represents the dominant sensibility in American stand-up. I can't say I disagree. I mean, there is a dominant sensibility. And I don't know if it's always political. I think it is this, hey, we have the right to talk. We are the freedom of speech guys. I mean, if you want to look at it from the correct way, it's all about speech. Freedom of speech. And you don't censor more speech unless that means more articles like this one from Seth Simon. And this is as good a piece that I've seen out there on this matter because it's reported, opinion, and it's real. Simons writes, what I would like instead is an honest reckoning with the fact that Gillis represents the dominant sensibility in American stand-up. He was a regular in New York's comedy scene until he moved to Austin, Texas, and has several shows coming up at Radio City Music Hall. He just sold out the theater in Illinois, the BMO Center. Made a big deal about it in the news. His firing in 2019 inspired heated backlash from many of his peers because they peddle all the same wares, from cruel racist invectives to naked transphobia. Today, many comedians in his class have followed him down the road paved by Chappelle and Joe Rogan to become the most popular in the world. It would be naive to pretend their success has nothing to do with their bigotry, or that the motive of their bigotry somehow strips it of ideological force. That's an important sentence in this piece. Because why are they popular? It's not because they're suddenly funny. It's the bigotry is selling. And it's selling so profoundly that Saturday Night Live had no choice but to say, hey, come on back, Shane, you can host. It would be naive to pretend the success of comics like Chappelle and Rogan has nothing to do with their bigotry, or that the mode of their bigotry somehow strips it of ideological force. The bigotry is ideological. As Gillis is fond of observing, it's Donald Trump's facility with humor that makes him such an appealing figure. We like the funny racists. The funny racists have infected us. My commentary. Back to Simons. Whether deployed by politicians or entertainers, comedy's power is to needle deep into the subconscious, forming an emotional bond that transcends reason. To laugh is to feel pleasure. How can pleasure be wrong? No, whatever makes us laugh must be good. Otherwise, we wouldn't be laughing, right? I mean, that's a great point. If we're, it's got to be good. It's pleasure. I don't know. I think we fool ourselves. And then the last graph. The people who make and enjoy racist comedy often defend it on the grounds that comedians should not be held to the same standards as politicians. It's true, they shouldn't, but we should all be held to high standards when it comes to bigotry. And the standard for don't be a bigot is actually quite low. As with its booking, Nikki Haley, who has opposed marriage equality and demonized trans people, SNL's olive branch to Shane Gillis reflects a dangerous failure to learn from the hate movements that blossomed during the Trump era. Now, this is something they bring up Nikki Haley. She's opposed marriage equality. She's anti-trans. But when you see her, unless you know that this is her position, you know, she gets a pass. So Simon's piece says SNL's olive branch to Shane Gillis reflects a dangerous failure to learn from the hate movements that blossomed during the Trump era. Go back to Charlottesville. Go back to the tiki torches. It's like, yeah, I think we haven't learned. We have seen what happens when racism's popularity is mistaken for legitimacy. I'm not sure it's a mistake we can afford to keep making. And this is from Seth Simons, who writes for Humorism, a newsletter about labor, inequality, and extremism in comedy. Seth Simons wrote this for the LA Times. It's behind a paywall if you can't get it. I read it. You can just go back, and I had my own commentary in there because basically I agree with Simons. Simons did some reporting here that is actually quite good. He went behind the paywalls. He found where after Gillis was fired from Saturday Night Live in 2019, he continued to do all this stuff. He hadn't changed. He continued behind closed doors to be racist, and he has perfected this, hey, I'm going to be two-faced. To you, I'll be this way. But deep down inside, this is how I feel. No different than Donald Trump. And now the real problem is people see Gillis, they see his popularity, they say, hey, I like him. I like people I know who are generally what I'd consider liberals. Say, yeah, we like Shane Gillis. Oh, yeah? Well, and this is why if you are either a comedian or believe in free speech or work in those fields, I don't want to censor. I don't want to cancel. But I want people to be aware of the debate. I want people to be aware of what's happening. And I want comedians to know, and other people who are quick to say, hey, no harm, no foul. I want people to know that there are others with opinions who say, hey, wait a minute. There is harm. There is foul. And we got to learn from what we have seen in the past. If Shane Gillis is coming back, what has changed, if anything? Nothing, it would seem, after reading this excellent Seth Simons commentary in the LA Times. You know, I'm going to see it because on Saturday, because I got to see if something happened. I got to see what he says. like I said, I'm not for canceling, but I am for more speech, not less. And you got to know, you got to be able to report, you got to know what's been said, and then put it out there and let consumers know what's out there so they can make up their mind. We can't tell people, hey, don't see this guy, but they should know after reading this Seth Simons piece that why bother with Gillis? SNL, are they making a mistake or they know what they're doing? Because before Saturday, will the buzz then now come up because we're now closer to the day? And what of people on the cast? What will they do? I think it's an important moment because for our culture, because it'll say something to those of us who work in the BIPOC community. It'll say something about how much more difficult it is to fight for the civil rights and the standards that we've been fighting for decades. For decades. You want to go back to 64, 65? We were fighting before that. And this is part of that erosion. I mean, how else can you say it? It is an erosion. So that's the Shane Gillis article by Seth Simons in the LA Times. It was behind a paywall. If you can't get it, if you missed it, go back, use your rewind. If you're on YouTube, my YouTube channel at Emil Amok 1, and then check it out because it's pretty well reasoned and documented. The LA Times vetted all the stuff behind paywalls. It's not some crackpot editorial. It is reported opinion and makes you think twice before we say, hey, all is well after 5 years. As I said, I don't believe in censorship, but I believe in more speech. I just said, I don't think that if there are 27 million Asian Americans, I think the proper penance should have been 27 million Our Fathers and 27 million Hail Marys for Shane Gillis. And did he do it in 5 years? Or maybe there's just a time period. 5 years is the time period for cancellation. He's doing fine without us. So I think it's really more of a kind of in-your-face move by SNL to say, hey, we're putting Shane Gillis up there. Hey, wait a minute. Weren't you backing us? What's it say about SNL? It just says they're going for the money. Shane Gillis is one of the hottest acts around. They're going for the money. And right now, I guess you make more money with racism than you do with equity, fairness, or justice. That's sad. That's a sad comment. If NBC hasn't commented about any of this, but what if the reality is, hey, I'm sorry, Emil, we can make more money with racism. Yeah. And I guess blackface is coming back, brownface is coming back. Actually, and all this is happening at the same time. The population of people of color has gone up. The populations of people from, various divergent backgrounds are out, and it's rising. And this is the pushback. So something to think about as we go toward Saturday. Like I said, I imagine there'll be more pieces out tomorrow, Friday, or Saturday. But of the pieces that I've seen so far, I saw one in Vulture this one in the LA Times. I wrote mine on Monday on the ALDEF blog, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog, aldef.org/blog. And then another offshoot of that column on Inquirer.net, which is the website for the Philippine American newspaper, Inquirer, the Philippine Inquirer. And I think of all people, of any groups, well, LGBTQ groups should be upset. Asian American groups, most certainly. Seth Simons has a clear Jewish American perspective, calling out the anti-Semitism. So let's see. Let's see what happens. Let's see what the response is. Not for censorship, not for cancellation. We just need more speech. We need to flood the space with our opinions if we disagree. If we do not agree with the hiring of Shane Gillis and with his jokes, we need to let people know. I mean, I was doing a set at the Hollywood Improv, like I said, on Sunday, and I heard a Filipino joke. I was appalled. I mean, I'm Filipino. I could tell those Filipino jokes. Well, when someone, and this was another Asian, I said it yesterday in yesterday's show. I just couldn't believe he was saying that joke. It was racist. There was nothing you can say to defend. Indefensible. But I'll call him out, but I don't want to. He's got a right to speak, but he also needs to know that when he says those kind of things, he puts it out there for us to comment and condemn him. That's the way it works. All right. Once again, we're going to end our show here. Birthday of my good friend Ishmael Reed, who's written a new play, The Shine Challenge. Check out The Shine Challenge. You can go to the PETA podcast and listen to my interview with him, with Ishmael talking about it, and then go to nuyorican.org and get a ticket that's good for the next couple of weeks to see a stage reading of The Shine Challenge. If you're watching YouTube, it's up there on the screen. nuyorican.org. Get those tickets through Ovation Tix. Okay. My thing, I am at the I'm at the Rogue Festival in Fresno with my one-man show. And here you got a place to get tickets at the FresnoRogueFestival.org. And go to Emil Amok, 2 words, and get tickets for my show March 2nd, 3rd, a couple other dates. Don't miss it. It's a week from this coming weekend. What else? Oh, and then if you missed it, go to Kings River Life. It's a publication in that Fresno area that is associated with the Fringe, the Rogue Festival. And I write about my show, Emil Amok, Lost NPR host, married to PETA, and other untold stories of a Filipino-American life. Check it out, kingsriverlife.com. All right. So, thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific live, talking about the news, talking about some ideas that, may not hear about. Doing some meditation. Meditation is always good. Always good. And coming up next week on the PETA podcast, I did an interview today with Kip Anderson, who did a bunch of movies. Seaspiracy he did. He did one on your health. But he's going to going to the theaters with this one, Christspiracy. It's about the film he made after someone posed the question, is there a spiritual way to kill an animal? In other words, what would Jesus do? It's not a religious film. It's a film that makes you think, though. Anyway, nothing but love from me to you. Thank you for joining us. We end with a little meditation. A little loving kindness, a little metta. As I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal